Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Secret Origins of Mint Condition. I am James, and with me is Chris.
Hi there.
And Joe.
Good day, folks.
And returning friend of the show is Keith Tarnowski.
Hey, guys.
And we are doing our first one of these shows where we're going to do a special spotlight on a character. And we teased it during Keith's last appearance, but this is going to be about the Flash, and more specifically, Wally West as the Flash. There's a lot of places we can go. There's a lot of history with this character. And Keith talked about some of this on his first appearance on the show. But I think it's good to reiterate, since this might be, like Stan Lee used to say, this could be someone's first podcast. So Keith, why don't we re-sum why Wally West or why the Flash?
Okay. Well, I'm sure a lot of listeners these days may not know as much about Wally West, because Barry Allen came back to life, so to speak, in the comics in 2009, got a TV show that was very popular, movies coming out. He was in Justice League. So to a whole generation, Wally really is, either wasn't really heard of, or he was the former Kid Flash, But for 22 years of comic book publishing, Wally was the Flash. He headlined the Flash book. He was, for 247 issues plus 13 annuals and specials and miniseries. He was the Flash of the JLI, JLA through many incarnations. He was my Flash growing up. He is my favorite character inside and outside of comics for many reasons. One of them being the fact that he is the first sidekick ever in the history of comics to fulfill the promise, so to speak, to take over the mantle of his mentor, quote unquote, permanently. And what I mean by that is, back then, 22 years of publishing sure seemed like forever. It seemed like that was it. Not a lot of people were clamoring for the return of Barry Allen. So he's a special character. I think that's pretty unique that a sidekick could take over the mantle permanently and with such popularity through all those years. He was a unique backstory, which I think is something special we're kind of missing out of comics now, and I think would have been really interesting for movies and the show. But that, even that stuff aside, it was one thing that's great about Wally was, I grew up with him. When I was around 12, 13, he was a 20-year-old, startup Flash who had formerly been Kid Flash for many years, but he had some growing pains as the lead hero. He wasn't perfect like Barry. He stumbled quite a bit. He was a jerk at times, and his very first issue of being the Flash, he was asked to deliver a heart cross country for a surgery, and he told the hospital he would definitely do it, but he wanted free medical insurance for the job, because he didn't have any money and he needed it. He would womanize a bit. He wasn't perfect. Ultimately, he'd always do the right thing, but he stumbled a lot, and it was interesting to watch that progression. As a kid, I was like, this is. It was fascinating. Everyone else, Superman was perfect. Batman was perfect. Green Lantern, so to speak. Everyone was like these noble heroes that didn't stumble too much, and Wally wasn't. And throughout those 22 years of publishing through various writers, I watched him go from kind of like, first, before that, a doe-eyed kid who just looked up to his mentor, to kind of a jerky early 20s guy, to slowly progress into this great man and hero that we always knew he could be. It was always there. Even when he would kind of screw up and stumble, he would always ultimately do the right thing. I remember there was one issue where he got evicted from his apartment by this jerky landlord. And then later on, a couple issues later, the landlord's daughter was kidnapped by Vandal Savage, and the landlord was a real jerk to Wally about the eviction. Like he was definitely a bad guy. And when the landlord called Wally to ask for help to save his daughter, Wally said, no, I'm sorry, Wally West doesn't live here anymore. He's been evicted, and he hung up on him. And that's how the issue ended. But literally the first minute of the next issue, he quickly came to his senses, and without powers at that time, which is a whole other part of the story, went and saved that guy's daughter powerless. It was just a fascinating arc watching him grow, eventually becoming this great hero, a husband, and much later, a father to twin kids, which ironically happened right around the time I became a dad. So I felt like I really grew up with Wally. And I feel like he's, one of, if not the best fleshed out DC character for that. He's not inspired by darkness. Not tragedy. He does the right thing because it is the right thing to do. So those are a few of the reasons why he's my favorite character in comics and outside of comics.
Well, that's great. And I guess for the listener who might not be familiar with Wally or might not be familiar with comics, I think you relate to Joe, and for me and Chris to read, just to refresh ourselves, that Born to Run, I guess the trade paperback is his origin. And I guess without spoiling things, how does Wally get his powers?
Do you want to take that, Keith? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it might have seemed hokey back in the Silver Age, but Wally's first appearance was in Flash number 110, which is only a few issues after Barry's technically first issue 105, right, not including the showcase issues. And again, it was a hokier time, so literally Barry Allen was showing Wally West. I'm sorry, the Flash was showing Wally West around Barry Allen's lab, acting like he wasn't one and the same person. And he was explaining to him how he got his powers, how an errant bolt of lightning crashed through the window and doused him with chemicals. And moments later, the same exact thing happened to Wally West. So again, that was hokey. He became Kid Flash immediately. Barry gave him a smaller version of his costume, and he was his sidekick for many years. They later, through that Born to Run story, and then even in other stories, alluded to the fact that Barry and or the Speed Force kind of chose Wally to be his partner. Knowing his inherent goodness, he was chosen. The Speed Force kind of chooses who has their power. But back in the day, it was just very simple coincidence. Lightning struck twice.
Yeah, that's great. That was my follow-up question, because I read it and I have to say I'm not a big I wasn't a big Flash fan. I mean, I'm probably more familiar with the Flash from the CW show and from his time when I was reading comic books. He was the character in the Mark Waid JLA run is how I knew Wally the best. So I was never sure if they kept with that same origin, if they retconned it somehow, if they just kept going forward with him. So I'm glad you've cleared that up, that it was like the Speed Force as like the entity we know the Speed Force to be chose him for this role.
What I'd like to add to what Keith. Well, first I want to say, Keith, the way you encapsulated Wally's history just now, I think we should send at least this part of the podcast to DC Comics, listen to or not the Flash will no, we'll come over and we'll kill you, because this is the way they should be writing comic books. This is the character that they've dumped. We'll get to that later on, how they dumped on him. But that was a great retrospective you just delivered, Keith.
Well, you know what? Because it's not to say that Wally doesn't have tragedy in his life and he hasn't had bad things happen. He has. His parents were, kind of bad parents. Not not terribly abusive, but they weren't really interested in being parents. He's had tragedy. He's stumbled a lot, but Wally always manages to smile. And one thing, Mark Waid, I quote Mark Waid once. He said, "This kind of captures Wally. Every time, all Wally ever wanted to be was the Flash. He grew up idolizing the Flash, and when Barry died, which was tragic to Wally, and he took on the role to honor his mentor. But it also was like, imagine you one day growing up to be your favorite hero, Superman or Batman. Yeah, he loved it. Wally, Mark Waid would say, every time Wally put the costume on, it was like a kid on Christmas. He loved it. He didn't look at it as a burden. It was his dream come true. He literally lived to become what he always wanted to be. And I think that's unique. He's not grim and gritty. When that kind of writing's been forced on him, it never works out. Not at all. He's a wonderful character, and I think he's kind of even more unique as that these days, with all the grim and darkness.
It's kind of funny because he really, especially, and thank you, Keith, for that breakdown, because I echo what James and Joe both said, which is it really helps you get to know the Flash in a nutshell. Well, Wally specifically in a nutshell. But this is one of the few characters that I sort of think was written the Marvel way, in that you have he's a person first. He really is a person first. And what Marvel for such a long time was better at doing, and some might argue is still the case, was better at doing was creating heroes that are flawed. And one of the problems with a lot of DC heroes is that they come from ridiculously tragic backgrounds, such as losing their parents or having their planet explode or whatever. Like you said, his parents weren't good parents. They weren't bad parents. They weren't like abusive or anything. So there was nothing dramatic about his upbringing. They just didn't understand each other. They didn't get along. His parents weren't particularly good. So like, and this kid ends up like idolizing the Flash, and then he ends up being in this place where he ends up stepping into the shoes of his hero, but like he has money issues. So yeah, he wants to get health insurance. I personally love the fact that like all of his rogues smack talk him because they respected Barry Allen. They do not respect Wally West at all. And so we get to see him grow as a person, but we also see him part of that growth as a person is seeing how his rogues come to respect him, and in some ways he comes to respect at least some of his rogues. And so it's really interesting that Wally kind of breaks the mold as far as DC characters and how they're created.
That's a great take, Chris. And you know what? I have a few flashbacks here that I want to get to, but yes, he was written like a Marvel character, and he grows up with the DC universe because Wally's. I mean, as Keith said, he was there in Flash 110. That's only 5 issues after Barry gets the book. Wally predates the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and the entire Marvel universe. Wally predates Silver Age, Hawkman, and Hawkgirl, and the Atom. So he's there from the very beginning, and he grows up with all these other heroes. And it's interesting because the maturation of Wally West is kind of like the maturation of the DC universe that started with basically showcase number 4, when Barry's first appearance, the first quote-unquote first Silver Age comic book. So it all ties together beautifully, and it ties together in this great character, this one character. And for me, I was born and raised with, well, born and raised. I was born a year before the Flash period. That's right. So 55. So yes. But my guy was Barry. We talked about the cover, 163. Stop! Don't pass up this issue. I will die. But as Keith said before, Wally was the Flash for 22 years, and even though the Flash of my youth was Barry, to me, Wally's the Flash, and Wally always will be the Flash because he just takes us on this great journey. It's a heroic journey of battling rogues, but it's also a heroic journey of battling the inconsistencies. And I wouldn't say demons in himself, but the stuff that we all deal with growing up. Getting past greed, getting past me. And Keith and I have talked about this many times. I think Wally becomes a man when he meets, really his last step to becoming a man is when he meets Linda and he marries Linda, because she really makes a man out of him.
And he's the only Flash who has an arc.
Yes, he
just is.
His arc is the entire run of the Silver Age DC universe, comic book canon.
Also, I don't necessarily know if it was planned at the time, but when Mike Barron first launched the book with number 1, and then Bill Messner-Loeb, and all these stumbling blocks, Wally being a jerk, Wally womanizing, Wally dating an older married woman, Wally, the stumbling block, Wally also not being as fast as Barry anymore. Because back in the Silver Age and up to Crisis, they were equals in speed.
Yeah.
But throughout the run, Wally wasn't running nearly as fast as Barry.
Yeah, he could only hit the speed of sound, right?
In the beginning, yeah, and then progressively, something would happen. He got into a battle with Vandal Savage in issue 50, and he sped up more, and this and that, and he got, he was faster. He was, but later on, I'm not sure if you guys had a chance yet to read the Return of Barry Allen story by Mark Waid, and it was alluded to throughout the run, but it really culminated in that where all those stumbling blocks, Wally losing his powers here and there, being slower, behaving the way he did, was really a mental thing, because much as he took over the role of the Flash to honor his uncle, but deep down, he never wanted to surpass him. He felt guilty about surpassing him, whether in speed or in accomplishments. So almost like he was like self-sabotaging. And when you read the Return of Barry Allen story, he's put into a situation where he has to essentially, speed-wise, if nothing else, match or surpass Barry in order to take on the threat of that arc. And there's one line in there which there's actually a couple lines. Actually, last night I screenshot them because I kind of wanted to even take a moment to quickly read it. It's not that long, but there's he's fighting the big. Have you guys read it yet?
I've read it many times.
No, I haven't gotten to it yet. I did finish Flash Volume 1.
I won't spoil. I won't tell you who he's fighting, but in it, he refers to everything kind of speed wise and how he was holding himself back. And one of the quotes is he's about to fight this big bad, and he's like, Max was right. He was right all along. He's like, I am afraid. I'm afraid of replacing Barry, but I'm more afraid of letting this bastard do it. And that's when his speed kicks in full force, and he just takes down the villain. And it's literally like one of the biggest moments in the character arc of Wally West, where he kind of just lets go of all his fear and self-doubt and really becomes the hero he is meant to be. And the title of that issue is actually called The Once and Future Flash. And it was just perfect. I remember I got chills even talking about that issue, but I remember reading that the first time. That whole arc, for so many reasons, getting blown away, getting chills, almost like roaring in my head with excitement. It's just it was just kind of like the culmination of many years of storytelling. And again, I don't know if that was planned from the beginning. I'm not sure if that's why they kind of wrote Wally the way he was for such a long time. But it was such a great, wonderful payoff. Again, he has a character arc.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite stories of all time. And as Wally's arc continues, again, he marries Linda. They have the twins, but Wally's arc continues in other mediums. And where it got crystallized for me about how Wally is the heart and soul of the DC universe, and I really believe he is. I think he's a symbol of hope in the DC universe. I know people say it's Superman, but it's Wally. And the Justice League, JLU cartoon, Justice League Unlimited. Keith and I have spoken about this many times. How the JLA is played. The people of the world think that they attacked them with that rail gun up in their satellite, and Superman and Green Arrow are going at it. Conservative versus liberal, and they're arguing politics and whatnot, and Wally gets between them and says, hey, people down there need our help. Table this crap, put this aside. We got to go down. We're heroes. We help people. We'll deal with our image afterwards. Right now, we've got to help people. And it's just like he becomes a leader there. And he is the character that, for me anyway, as I said, is the heart and soul of this universe. And I love reading his stories. And we can get to this later on, but there are things that DC Comics did to Wally that are terrible, especially in recent years. But for the most part, he's been their best written character in the last 30 years or so.
That's why for me it was a big. It was upsetting when they announced they were bringing back Barry Allen back in 2009 because ultimately I knew it was going to happen. 2008 actually, I knew it was going to happen. People at DC said it wouldn't, but I knew he'd be sidelined if nothing else. And even worse, I figured he'd be like story fodder. He'd be that redundant Flash that could be killed off or disgraced or something like that. And ultimately, that is what happened. First, he was disappeared for many years, like he didn't exist, and then when he was brought back, Heroes in Crisis was done to him. But it's kind of why I was upset about it for a while, because he's so not only a special character and so compelling, but unique to comics at all. Like he was a member of the Justice League that was a former sidekick. That was a unique story that a unique dynamic within the JLA instead of them all being the same exact peers. He had a different relationship with them, and it was unfortunate that I'm not saying they couldn't have brought Barry back, but I knew ultimately he'd be like the redundant Flash. Especially when the TV show happened. But, ask Joe. I love the first season of the TV show, but I didn't want to. I wanted to hate it.
But it's also one of those things where why are you bothering to bring Barry back? He had a hero's end, and there's no arc to finish. I mean, that's if you feel as though as a writer or as a creator, if you feel as though Wally's race is run, I can respect that. I may disagree with you, but I can respect it because he did. He had a really good run, and much like you guys are saying, I grew up with Wally being my Flash. He was the Flash I knew because I started with reading Batman JLA, and at that time, Wally was the Flash, so he was my Flash. But I just think if the story is done and his race is run, then I think fine. But I can't imagine there's a single good reason to bring Barry back. Barry did not have a character arc to speak of. He was always just sort of, like you said, Keith, he was always perfect. There was nothing really we needed to uncover about him. The only, and usually when you bring a character back like that, there ends up being something written into his past that throws into question everything we knew about him. And that's rarely something that interests me because I just don't have that kind of investment.
And look, yeah. Comic-wise, what have they really done with him? I don't think anyone can name a great Barry Allen story since 2009. Flashpoint was a really good comic, like as a DC event. I don't like what happened because of it, but like no one can name a great Barry Allen story, and there are dozens of amazing Wally West stories. And again, that first season of the TV show though was really great.
Sure.
Like I think that was one of the best superhero TV shows ever. That first season, I was glued to it, but it wasn't necessary. Again, it was, and I love Barry Allen, but I still think in the last 11 years, I haven't done anything great. I'm still waiting for some writer to come in and write to really get Barry Allen. I feel like they haven't gotten his character in the comics. They make him, because like, I think it was Chris who said it. What they did was when they brought him back, they gave him the dark, they retconned, or not retcon, but they gave him the dark backstory now with his mom being killed, which was compelling in the show, but now that's like a staple of him. Now Barry's always sad.
Yeah, we just don't need that, and there's nothing it brings that we haven't seen in other stories. Yeah, I think that's a poor choice.
I think I would have liked it more. I've talked to Joe about this before. I think it would have been great. I know things change in the whole Flash universe due to the New 52. Jeff Johns had a much bigger plan that he never got to do because of the relaunch. I think the mother being killed thing would have been a great story arc if it would have. I ultimately think that Jeff Johns' Flash Rebirth plan would have been somewhat like his Green Lantern Rebirth run, the mini and then the ongoing, and would have had a set plan. I think it would have been great if that story arc ended eventually, whether it was years later, with Barry saving his mom. That's how only way I could have really justified that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like what you said to start with, Keith, where you said like he fulfilled the promise of like a sidekick, which is one of the things that got me out of comics over time was like you keep the heroes never die, and in fact they come back. But for Wally, he did the full cycle. It's as many times as they've done the story with when Bruce died, or Bruce is out of commission and Dick becomes Batman, or somebody else becomes Batman. It's never going to be Batman. They're never going to be Batman for that long. No one's going to ever get Wally's run.
It seemed permanent, right? Like no one thought Barry was going to come back. It seemed really like that was it. He was in the cartoon. Ryan Reynolds was going to play him in a Flash movie written by David Goyer, but things just never worked out like it doesn't in Hollywood. Like that was the thing. Wally was the Flash, which I know is like for a lot of newer fans of the show and comics, it's hard to believe, but that was the world. Like I never doubted it. I thought Barry was gone forever.
Yeah, no, I was in the same boat. I always thought, whenever you would be talking to somebody about comics and they talk about, all these characters always come back. Right. The one thing we could always say was not Barry Allen.
Not Barry Allen, not Uncle Ben, right? Yeah,
because Wally was beloved. He was. There was really. There was there was definitely some fans that wanted Barry back that were, but like it was really like kind of small numbers. People loved Wally, which I think, Wally's back now in the comics after the horrific stuff that was done with him in Heroes in Crisis. Dan Didio was, let go from DC, and they brought Wally back to prominence, and they've exonerated him for the nonsense of that book. But oh man, it was rough. I came back to read that, and
that book is not on our reading list, right, Keith?
No, that's not. That shouldn't be on anyone's reading list.
It's toxic. It's 3 Mile Island meeting Chernobyl. Avoid that book by all means.
It's terrible for many reasons. The fact that it ultimately makes Wally I wouldn't want to say a villain, but kind of.
Yeah.
But also, it's just not really, it's not well done. I'm not sure if you guys have read it. Even the writer, Tom King, there's an interview online. I can find it for you guys at some point, where he admits that he never should have used Wally West for the story. It doesn't work for him, and it wasn't even a planned story for Wally. He had the bones of a story in place. Went to Dan Didio, and Dan Didio said, use Wally, Harley Quinn, and Booster Gold. It wasn't written for Wally, which you can tell. He's forced into it. It's out of character. It doesn't make sense to his powers when they try to explain it. And even the plot in and of itself is so sloppy. And, it was literally reversed it started being reversed 6 months later. So it goes to show you they didn't have confidence in it.
Yeah.
It was horrific. They realized they made a big mistake with that book.
Beautiful art, though.
Yes.
And just to go like what you said, because I'm, maybe you have a better pulse on it. I think we all, some of our listeners probably grew up more with the Justice League Unlimited cartoon than we did. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of those people, Wally West and goes to say John Stewart, those were the Green Lantern and Flash of their time. So would at this point more people be Wally West as their Flash? It seems like John Stewart is everyone's Green Lantern. So I would think the same would be for Wally West.
I would agree with that. And my favorite episode of that series is, of course, the Great Brain Robbery. Michael Rosenbaum is the Flash.
We need to start keeping a tally of how many times Joe mentions it, because he's not wrong. But I just want to be able to tick off all right, that's time number 4. That's number 5.
Here's another one you can take off. Terry Hatcher.
That's right.
But no, that's an incredible episode. It's hysterically funny. It's so well done. And again, Michael Rosenbaum should have gotten an Emmy Award for that. I don't know if they give them out for, but they do give them out for cartoon animated. Of course,
I think they do. No?
They do. It's limited. They're not going to give it to him for Best Actor, but yeah.
But that's an incredible story, and you look at Green Lantern. But Green Lantern had to come back. Hal had to come back because his story arc, DC, crapped all over him by making him Parallax. Even though he kind of redeems himself by saving the world in Final Night, but there was a reason to bring Hal back, but there was no reason to bring Barry back. Let Barry stay dead like with Uncle Ben. We don't, please don't bring him back. We've got Wally, but I guess the powers that be thought differently, and now we got them both.
Also, what happened, the big differences between Green Lantern Rebirth and Flash Rebirth is the effect they've had on their respective universes. Before Hal came back, I love Kyle to death. He's awesome.
Oh, Kyle's great guy.
But Kyle was the only Green Lantern at that point. I think maybe Kilowog was back, but he wasn't. None of them were Green Lanterns. The power battery was gone. It was just Kyle as Green Lantern. So when they brought Hal back, they expanded. They added to the universe. They brought back the core. They expanded. They brought so much back. There were 4 ongoing Green Lantern titles for a while, and Kyle was the star of 2 of them. Mm-hmm. Green Lantern Corps, and I think later New Guardians or something. Mm-hmm. They expanded upon it. I think Kyle probably got even more exposure,
Yeah.
And that lasted for almost 10 years, 8 years. When they brought Barry Allen back, I know they had all these supposed grand plans, but the universe shrunk after that. The New 52 happened, and Barry was the only Flash. Mm-hmm. Not only was Wally gone and never existed, but Jay Garrick, the guy who started it all, he never existed. Max Mercury was gone. Bart Allen, for all intents and purposes, might as well have been gone, because that kid in Teen Titans was not Bart.
No. I think a lot of what they were doing, with the when you're talking Green Lantern versus Flash, it was interesting because Green Lantern, the characters were different, but they also used their powers differently. They manifest differently, right? So Alan Scott versus Hal Jordan versus Kyle, the artist of them all, they all manifested their powers differently, whereas Flash was almost a direct line of descendants of one Flash learning from another. And so I could see how, even though the character of Wally is different than the other Flashes, it would be simple to go, yeah, we only need one Flash, though, because basically what they do is they run fast, and we know they have other powers. They can vibrate through stuff, and they can create cyclones and blah, blah, blah. They've got the Speed Force, but really one Flash is enough. And it's so easy for me to see how they would just, unfortunately, write off this terrific character by going, yeah, we can only have one Flash. Whereas with Green Lantern, I can easily see them saying, yeah, well, when you look at John Stewart, the way John Stewart creates constructs, it's much more technical, so visually it's more interesting. And I mean, I guess if we need a second Flash for a story, fine, but otherwise, visually, that doesn't really do anything for us. So once they decided to, bring Barry back, then it makes sense to me. I don't agree with it, but I can easily see how they end up doing Wally dirty the way they did.
Yeah, there's a Green Lantern core. There doesn't need to be a Flash core.
It's built into the concept of Green Lantern that there's a core. I get that. Also, but there was, behind the scenes, there was stuff, because I've read a lot of interviews with different writers like Francis Manapul, who did the New 52 run. There was a very conscious effort, though, I think, because at the time, think about it, Barry wasn't published for 22 years, really, except for a couple of flashbacks. I think it was also more of a lack of a better term, like threatened by Wally, because he has such a strong fan base, and you're trying to push one character, to be the main Flash again. I think they felt they had to kind of eliminate any kind of competition, so to speak.
Sure,
this is your
sure.
Flash.
Yeah, practically what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And again, I hate it, but it also doesn't surprise me the way you're describing it right now. And it's
exactly what happened.
I also feel like at the time, you may disagree with this, but at the time, I feel like I would have taken it better if he got a better send off. Like when Barry died in Crisis, man, he went out like the king. It was the most heroic thing. Wally literally didn't exist anymore. That was it.
You got to close his arc. I agree with you 100%. That's why I said earlier, like I don't mind saying goodbye to a character, but you got to close the arc on the character.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not been done great. Again, I wouldn't spoil how, because hopefully you'll read Starman one day, but Jack Knight gets a good send-off. He's not seen anymore. A totally different kind of send-off. Barry Allen had an amazing send-off. It's been done. I feel like I would have handled it better if he got a good send-off, either amazing superhero death in a big event that was important, or he went off with his family and lived happily ever after, and maybe you saw him in, at barbecues and Barry Allen issues here and there,
Yeah.
But instead, he literally didn't exist. His importance, he wasn't in the New 52 for a few years there, he was never the Flash. He never existed. That was kind of, I don't know, that stunk. I wasn't a fan of that.
It's a lazy way to handle it. It's not just crappy, right? But it's also lazy that you're going, well, then, what are we doing here?
What are you telling your fans? Like your beloved character you read, for 20-something years, didn't exist and doesn't really matter, Another problem with when they brought Barry back is, again, I feel like this is because they felt threatened by Wally West. You read Flash Rebirth and the issues after that, they are beating you over the head, telling you how better Barry is than Wally. He's the better, the real Flash. And that's a kind of a slap in the face, Even when they had Wally eventually surpass Barry power-wise, Wally always, and everyone always talked about Barry being, this great man. Like it was never an insult to Barry ever. In fact,
right.
As much as Wally did, he never thought he was as good as Barry. But man, read Flash Rebirth. They're beating you over the head with it, and it's kind of insulting.
I completely agree. Yep. Yeah. No, it's an insult to the fans, to everything.
So just for people who maybe want to jump in to Wally West, now after listening to this, I guess what's the state of the characters, the Flash universe as it stands right now?
Well, again, bad stuff happened in Heroes in Crisis, but you don't really need to know that too much. But Jeremy Adams came on the book, an issue, I think 768, a story arc called Blink of an Eye, a really fun story that also very much mirrors like Green Lantern Rebirth, where they explain the bad stuff that happened, redeeming him, and also in a really fun way. Not heavy, it's heartfelt, it's wonderful. I think Jeremy Adams is on his 9th issue now. Again, none of it's collected. They just started dropping them on the DC Universe app now. There's the first 2 parts, the first 2 issues on there. It's really great. It's new reader friendly. And he's back to basics. He's the main Flash because Barry's off, exploring the multiverse in Infinite Frontier and some other stuff. He's back with his family. He's a married, he's a dad of 2 kids, married man. It's fun superheroics, but it's also Wally taking his daughter to a daddy-daughter dance at the school. It's Wally getting a new job working for Mr. Terrific at his lab. It's a lot of fun. It's the kind of everyone I talk to reads it, kind of says they always have a smile on their face by the end of the issue.
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say also, not for nothing, but what you mentioned this earlier, Keith, and I really appreciated it. You talked about Wally going and saving a life without his powers. I wouldn't call this like necessary reading or anything, but I would say that if you have the opportunity to track down a little Elseworlds book called The Nail, I'm pretty sure it's The Nail, wherein and let me I should really have confirmed this. But no, it can't have been The Nail. There's a book where it's definitely Elseworlds, where all the superheroes of the world lose their powers. It wasn't The Nail, because The Nail was all about Superman.
Yeah, the Kents get a flat tire, right?
Right. So it's not The Nail. Forget The Nail. I'm gonna look it up, and I'm gonna find it. But there's an Elseworlds book where everybody loses their powers, and most of the superheroes decide, well, if I don't have powers, then I'm done. And there are very, very few that decide they're going to be trained by Batman and learn how to be heroes again. And Wally is one of them. Wally, unfortunately, he's in the process of saving a police officer from a bullet, and suddenly he's not faster than the bullet anymore, and the cop gets shot, and he just cannot stand the guilt. And it's only under Batman's tutelage that he's reborn as the Red Devil. And I still remember that it's him, Supergirl, Jean Jones.
Oh, it's
maybe it's not Supergirl, it's Power
Chris.
Girl.
It's JLA Act of God.
Thank you very much, James. JLA Act of God, where they lose their powers and there's no reason for it, and I like there doesn't need to be, because it's an Elseworld, it's fine. But it's like Supergirl, I did it again. Not Supergirl, Power Girl, Flash, Jean Jones, and Aquaman, and they're now mortal, no powers. And as they're sort of describing what their abilities and powers are, Wally sort of coyly says, and even Speed after fashion. But it shows just how dedicated he is to the notion of, I will do whatever it takes to help people, even in some small way. So if you get a chance to track down Act of God, it's nothing brilliant, but it's yet another, yet more evidence that Wally West grows into this character who every single loss hurts, and he's just there to help people.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely check that out. I'm going to look on the DC Universe app tonight, actually, see if it's on there. I'd like to recommend, some books to some potential to you guys, and also anyone listening, that I think are kind of essential, or if not essential, is kind of capture the heart of the character. I mean, like we said, Born to Run is definitely a wonderful origin story. Mm-hmm. That's collected in trade. The Return of Barry Allen, which is also, I think, it's my favorite comic book story, my favorite story, and definitely a must for a Flash fan. I think you'll just be glued to it. That either it's collected in trade or issues 74 to 79 of Wally's Volume 2, of Wally's series, which is Volume 2. I know Joe's talked about it a bunch of times, but Flash number 54, Nobody Dies.
Wow, what a great story.
A wonderful one-shot issue. Just reread that this morning. Which I know Joe says it's basically about, I don't even want to spoil it, but it's kind of in the same vein where Wally's got no way to figure out how to save this one person, but he jumps to it anyway and gets it done. It's very wonderful. JLA number 20 by Dwayne Mcduffie. I'm not sure if you guys read that series when Dwayne wrote the JLA book after Brad Meltzer.
No, I don't think I've ever dived into that stuff.
Wonder Woman, right?
Yeah, it's not, the whole run's not that great, but he did one issue. Ethan Van Sciver drew it, and it's just Wally and Wonder Woman teaming up, and it's just kind of like a day in the life where Diana's talking to him about she's trying to get him to spend more time with the League and kind of balance time more between his new family and all that, and just a wonderful issue. Nothing much to it. They fight the Queen Bee or something like that, but it's about like their friendship and what Wally's life is, what he's doing at that time, being a new parent. Really good. And one last one that I Flash number 0 by Mark Waid. It's collected in the Terminal Velocity trade. I think it's a perfect Flash issue. Kind of just tells you who he is, gives you a brief history. Beautiful story by Waid, and some great Mike Wieringo art. So if you guys get a chance, that's kind of what I'd like to recommend to everyone.
Those sound great. I was going to ask you for. I'm glad you took the the cue, Keith, and you gave us essential Wally West.
I took this very seriously. I was very.
No, it's terrific. I love it.
Yeah, no. Those are, and we can. You're very specific, so we can go either to Comixology or wherever and just look them up and get them.
Yeah.
So we'll have to do, I think, another Flash episode because I think there's probably more to say about Wally and probably even expend upon Barry as much as we I wouldn't say gave Barry a hard time in this episode, but Barry had his time maybe and it shouldn't have encroached on Wally's time. But we could probably do another episode. But before we wrap this up, Joe, you have some Flash facts you want to take us out with?
Well, I gave you a few. Just to reiterate, when you think about Wally premiering in Flash 110, December 1959, Meet Kid Flash, I mean, that was by John Broome, the writer, who wrote a lot of the Jay Garrick stories in Flash in the 40s. Carmen Infantino, who also drew Jay Garrick, and Joe Giello was the inker. And the fact that, Wally predates the entire Marvel universe. He was on printed page before the Fantastic Four. So I just want people to know that when you speak about these great Silver Age characters, and I am not in any way demeaning the dawn of the Silver Age at Marvel Comics, because that's probably what saved comic books, Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. But please remember that Wally was around at the beginning, albeit the other company, but still, while he should get the respect that he definitely deserves. And Wally is the first Flash to have a number one. Barry started his number one was Flash 105, 1959.
Yep.
Continuation of Flash Comics. So Flash Volume 2, number one is Wally's number one. So it's just a few Flash facts there.
No, those are great.
Very nice.
I'd like to say one thing, if I could, before we go. For you guys or anyone listening, I'd love it if you promote the new book, the Jeremy Adams Flash book. His first issue is 768. It's just a wonderful book, and I think the book needs some love and attention from readers, and really hopefully it continues on. Flash 768 was his first part, but the book comes out monthly. It's a wonderful story. I think most comic fans would love it.
What's the best way to read that? Is that on Comixology or?
It's on Comics. All the issues are on Comixology, but also the first two parts are on the DC Universe app. If you want to just do that streaming kind of service, and then they'll come out monthly. But they're all on Comixology. Okay, because maybe for this episode, I'll put a link to the Comixology thing in the show notes, and if people want to go to the 768 of the Flash, they can jump right into to Wally West right now. So, well, thank you, Keith, once again for being on the show and doing this retrospective on Wally West. I think we'll have you back for other reasons, but I think having you back to talk more Flash, we'll definitely do that in the future. Hopefully, I'd love to come back anytime, talk any topic. This was great. It was a lot of fun. And I really appreciate the opportunity. It was great. Oh, excellent. And once again, thanks, Joe. Thank you for all your Flash knowledge.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Keith. This was fantastic. Great job.
Yeah, it really was. You did great, Keith.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I was a little nervous.
You did really well. And thanks to you, Chris, for all your Flash knowledge. I think I'm the one with the least amount of Wally West knowledge, so I appreciate all of you chiming in and filling in the gaps for our audience and really giving the character his proper respect in this
Always
episode.
Happy to talk Wally West.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So thank you, everyone, for listening. We will have some of these links in the show notes, so you can start jumping into Wally West. I'll see if I can put some links to the trades that Keith spoke about. If you're interested also in joining in the conversation, we have the Facebook group page, Secret Origins of Mint Condition on Facebook. We have Secret Origins MC for both the Instagram and the Gmail account, so you can contact us there. And thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon.